Chapter 15 Something New Part 1 Wanyenyekevu, being the last one to prepare his plate, sat down on his air mattress, saying, "As a Wakatilian, we pay attention to history and believe in our ancestry, and most of us believe in Sabaoth. For we believe that a tree without roots shall perish, so shall a man who doesn't take heed of his past. Life has a funny way of recycling events in our life that we don't pass the first time around. It's like taking a test. You will have to take that test repeatedly until you get it right." Louisiana. Pointing to Jonathan. It is prosperous but filled with hatred and lots of history. Not only that, many cultures come from it as well. You have the French, Spanish, European, Native American, and African slave descendants, and a combination of them. For example, mixing these cultures created people, pretty much like the Abenian created, or, should I say, divided us. The most famous people from this region were called Cajuns and Creoles from the southern parts, and mostly descendants of Native Americans from the northern part. Some practiced black magic, voodoo, and witchcraft, and some worshipped Sabaoth. You had the French who practiced voodoo, some practiced witchcraft, and some worshipped Sabaoth. For each culture, it is the same scenario for each practice or belief. I can date this to when Louisiana became Louisiana and the trans-African slave trade began. The same history is true of those from the islands in the West Indies because of the trans-African slave trade, where words like mulatto and Côte Noire became famous. The brutality of slave owners and slaveholders, who raped men, women, and children alike, bred these mulattoes. The cruelty of the slaves from Africa and the dark-skinned natives created children of white fathers, and slave mothers were mixed-race slaves classified as these mulattoes. It meant a person with white and black parents, but eventually it was used for any mixed-race people, period. Colorism, racism, and discrimination were the most effective weapons against us, but colorism pitted us against ourselves. Lighter-skinned slaves were treated more favorably than those with darker skin. It upholds the white standards of beauty and benefits white people in their institutions of oppression. We all know they assigned slaves with lighter skin domestic tasks, while they forced slaves with darker skin to work outside in the fields, doing much more work. The paper bag test was often used. If someone were the same color or light as a paper bag, they were accepted. If they were any darker than a paper bag, they were not. In New Orleans, the southeastern part of Louisiana, the Côte Noire was used daily. Defined mulatto again as 1/2 white, half black, quadroon, 3/4 white, 1/4 black, octoroon, 7/8 white, 1/8 black. The Côte Noire created colorism wherein the black community, dark-skinned men and women, preferred lighter-skinned blacks because they felt their children would have a higher social position, and light-skinned blacks made up the largest percentage of the free black population. Very few people know that some white women were indentured servants and had children with slaves and free African-descended men. Because of the mother status, those children were born free and often married other free people of color. Many slaves in the United States during the 19th century were of mixed race, and with each generation, the number of mixed-race slaves doubled every 10 years. All the different cultures mixed with one another. Meanwhile, in places up north like Utah, sexual relationships with a slave resulted in the slave automatically being freed. Wanyenyekevu paused for a minute. "Excuse me, I realize that I am the only so-called Wakatilian here, but I was trying to educate Jonathan about something he said a few months back, and I got sidetracked." Daniel held up his hands. "What's a paper bag?" Reaching into his bags, he explains to Daniel, while grabbing an old torn book. "This is my Torah. It was once called the Bible back in the days, but it had fewer books than it has now. In it are the words and life of Sabaoth's children, leaders, warriors, and Sabaoth himself. They all started reading and discussing the Torah, and hours passed before they fell asleep. Jonathan was half asleep when a light was turned on. "Hey! Someone turn that light off!" he shouted to Jome. Jome replied, "You turn it off." I turned it off before I went to bed. The light got brighter and brighter. Wanyenyekevu turned over. "Will someone please turn that light?" Staring straight into the sky, Wanyenyekevu saw a circular object with a large beam of light coming from its center and many smaller lights circling it, going right to left and then left to right. "Look up!" shouted Wanyenyekevu. Fear had consumed them all. Then a voice was heard by the entire group. "Be not afraid, for he is a prophet of Sabaoth." There was no sound coming from the craft as it started lowering itself a few feet above the ground, as vapor slowly became a cloud. Jonathan and Jome grabbed their weapons, but Wanyenyekevu held their weapons by the barrels. "Did you not hear the voice of the messenger, the ancient Mfariji?" Jonathan, shaking, said, "I'm afraid of that too." Wanyenyekevu lowered their weapons toward the ground, saying, "Don't be afraid of that voice either." I'm not sure if any Anakatas or Compayatans have ever heard the messenger's voice, but neither one of us has ever seen this before. The cloud became thicker and thicker within seconds. A figure appeared 8 feet tall with grayish-white skin. "Please don't be alarmed, for Sabaoth has sent me." Gesturing to them to sit, "Please sit." The being said to them, "I have come a long way just to speak to you all." He took off a golden chain with a black marble-like vial about half an inch long, made from an unknown substance from around his neck, and handed it to Wanyenyekevu. "This is for you and your descendants, a gift from Sabaoth, we call it San." Wanyenyekevu took the necklace and placed it around his neck. "No one can take it from you unless you give it to them. It shall protect you and those that chose Sabaoth. No man shall receive his San until they have been enlightened." The being's eyes flashed a few times vertically as it continued. "My name is Z. I'm one of 4 species who have visited Earth many times and for many years, centuries even. We're called the Tall White Spy." Looking at Jonathan as he handed him 2 smooth stones, "Make sands with these, however, they will not be as powerful until you meet the one with the glow. Please have a seat, there is much to say." Jonathan stood there frozen with his mouth open with what appeared to be a smile on Prophet Z's face. He gently closed his mouth. Jonathan tried to speak, but nothing came out. As the being continued, "As I was saying, we're called the Tall Whites by your people centuries ago, and my species worship and serve Sabaoth as well." He reached into a device and grabbed a book, the Torah, handing it to Wanyenyekevu. The language changed from Prophet Z's to English as Wanyenyekevu flipped through the pages. "You have many more books than we have," Prophet Z said. "We're also older than any human." And smiled. "I'd walked with Mshika when he was flesh." The being walked toward Daniel as he looked at Daniel and asked, "May I?" Gesturing to sit next to him. Daniel patted the bed twice. "Sit here." Looking back up, Prophet Z continued, "Please have a seat." Some continued to stand while the rest took a seat. Prophet Z said, "There is much to talk about, it will be best to sit." They finally all sat down as Prophet Z continued. "Many have refused to believe that anyone exists besides themselves. There are over 100 billion galaxies in the foreseen universe and 500 billion planets in the Milky Way alone, and they think they are alone on this small planet, may I add, tiny as it is. Just imagine an ant sitting on a table within your home. Humans are the ants, Earth is the table. Your universe would be the room in which the table seats. Therefore, what would be the other rooms? What would be the house next door and even greater outside the house? The atmosphere? Or even space? That ant would be a fool to think he was the only ant. What about the other bugs that live outside of the ants? Foolish thinking for foolish people." After a brief pause, Z looked at their faces, knowing it was much for them to take in, but he continued. "Some sometimes referred to our race as the third party. We're conscious beings that are telepathic, whose humanoid shape were born when it was written, 'Let there be light,' and it was light. So therefore, we're born millenniums before your species and in another galaxy. Other species have come to observe, some to conquer. We came to protect you from them and sometimes from yourself. Many came with ill will because Sabaoth chose your species over them. After all, they existed before you. Yet, you fight among yourself for the silliest reasons. Your species is the chosen race, the most incredible creation of Sabaoth, because you have free will. We're smarter, use a significant percentage of our brains compared to humans, and therefore are more intelligent than you. You have been envied and hated by many of Sabaoth's creations before you. Your species is naive, for many even started worshipping our kind. Some governments back then would welcome them, and in return, they shared their technology with your kind, knowing many would become greedy and destroy the planet with it. And so it did, but the plans of Sabaoth cannot and will not be stopped. When righteousness is more, evil itself cannot be seen. Now sin is stronger among you, and righteousness is at its weakest. This is why your so-called Abenians have come to Earth. The evil one or the great deceiver has stomped out the many lights of Sabaoth through lust, greed, and power." Pulling up a screen from a device, he held a live video of an Abenian many miles away in a jet ship. Wanyenyekevu shouted, "That's hideous, they are a different kind of ugly." Jonathan and Jome had strange looks on their faces. Jome said, "I have never seen an ugly Abenians. Both males and females are all beautiful." Jonathan felt more like himself and said, "You got to be blind. What in the world do you see?" Wanyenyekevu said, "That's not even human. I see a large hideous figure resembling human feces, with one enormous eye in the center and long eyelashes." Jonathan laughed. How is it you don't see that beautiful creature? I'm with Jom. I have never seen an ugly Abenian. Z showed them another one in the frozen region of northern Greenland. What is it, you see? Wanyenyekevu said. A black panther-looking creature with a hideous smile on his face whose 4 feet are 4 small hands. Jonathan laughed. That's a fine-ass Abenian female. Prophet Z turned to Jonathan and Jom and said, what you see is what they know, how they looked before they fell from grace, and Wanyenyekevu sees them as they are, for these are the fallen angels of Sabaoth, what you refer to as demons. Remember when I said earlier that when righteousness is greater, evil itself cannot be seen. Now evil is more, and very few serve righteousness, therefore, the Abenians are here on earth. Well, before the Abenian, as you call them, came to earth, there were more righteous people, and their presence wasn't seen, but they were here in spirit and have been here since their fall, only possessing those who were truly evil. But the hearts of many have become cold. The preacher preaches prosperity instead of love. Technology led to laziness, greediness, perversion, and lust. As the evil grew on earth, the fallen angels of Sabaoth could then come in their original form before they fell from grace. Once spirits, now flesh, to deceive and pervert the words of Sabaoth to men. Showing them one last picture, what do you see? Millions of Abenians. Said Elijah. Like when you stir up an ant bed. Elijah and Joy had said almost simultaneously. Wanyenyekevu said. Minions. Prophet Z smiled, looked at Wanyenyekevu, and said, this is the South Pole and there are twice as many on the North Pole. The cold weather prevents you from going there, but lower-class demons are waiting to destroy the earth. Just waiting to be called. Daniel had fallen asleep on Prophet Z, so he carefully placed Daniel on the air mattress and covered him. Only those enlightened can see the Abenians for who they are, so for the next 3 months you are to stay here and train. You all are Sabaoth people, his warriors, he has chosen you all. Pointing at Ibrahim's children, be not discouraged because you are not familiar with this world, for all that you know will come in handy later. A surprise awaits you once you get to Arizona. Know this, Sabaoth has found favor in your family. This family, Wanyenyekevu and these 2 brothers are with you, and you all will teach and learn from one another. Wanyenyekevu will help you see evil, see the Abenians as they truly are, through enlightenment. He turned to Jonathan and Jom. You 2 were chosen to do a work that has not been seen since the days of old. You shall open the eyes of your people, Sabaoth's people. For all of humanity belongs to Sabaoth. In days past, they divided black from white, male from female, a mother from father. But listen carefully, separation causes division, and division causes war. Because of this, sons shall be against fathers, right against wrong, and nature against technology, which leads to destruction. Men look at silly things to judge one another, but Sabaoth searches the heart. Prophet Z talked until dawn when he stood up. I must go now. He touched the sand around Wanyenyekevu's neck and said, I can rest now, for my promise has been kept, and now I shall see Sabaoth face to face. A thick cloud appeared, and it got thinner and thinner, and the spaceship hovered a few feet about them, and within a blink of an eye, it was gone.